This is Catching Exceptions, and today I'm going to introduce you to a man who needs no introduction, but he's going to get one anyway. Implementing iBloggable, John West. So thank you for being here with me today. Appreciate it. The way this works is I'm just going to ask you a few questions and then try to get to know you a bit better. So, first question. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I'm from California. I grew up in Sonoma town, and then later on Petaluma. And I've moved around a lot. I moved to Northern California for college, and then I moved to Silicon Valley for work, and then I moved to Ireland for work. I moved back to Northern California, then back to the Bay Area, then to San Diego, then to Portland, then back to the Bay Area, and then back to Portland, where I live now.
So let me ask, what were you doing in Silicon Valley?
I was working for a company called Xilinx, X-I-L-I-N-X, which is a field programmable gate array semiconductor fabless company. So they design silicon chips, and almost anybody that's ever done any circuitry stuff has probably used Xilinx or Altera or a couple of other competitors' chips. But it's interesting because when I talk to people, I often meet people that have used chips that I worked on processes to support.
I remember Xilinx. Yeah, we had that in class. What years were you there?
I moved to Silicon Valley in 1996, and I was there until 1998, and then I spent most of 1999 in Ireland.
So really? So you got to see it before it is what it is now.
It changed a lot. Silicon Valley, when I was a kid growing up in the Bay Area, it was farmland and just hilly, green area. And when I lived there, by the time I lived there, a lot of it had been paved over. And while I was there, they were still kind of taking out orchards and putting in housing tracts. And so it was really changing from a rural environment to a very kind of corporate, homogeneic, very structured, paved environment while I was there.
Was you doing skateboarding?
No, I did. I rode my mountain bike to work one day, and the traffic was so scary that I never did that again. I love to ride bikes, but I wouldn't do it in the freeways of Silicon Valley.
Good advice. All right, so second question. What was it that got you started in programming?
In 5th grade, my teacher brought a VIC-20 to the classroom and programmed it to play tic-tac-toe, and I thought this was just phenomenal. I thought it was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen. So I tried to program it to play Connect 4, which is a little bit more complicated than tic-tac-toe, and I didn't have enough memory. The VIC-20 had 3.5K of RAM, so
it wasn't that you didn't understand it. You ran out
it's
of
probably a combination in 5th grade. In machine language, maybe I could have done it, but I didn't know machine language at the time. So BASIC certainly was not the right platform for that game in 3.5K of memory. So a friend of mine had acquired a Commodore 64, and he thought it was the greatest thing he'd ever seen. And so he convinced me that it was important for me to get one. And my brothers and I pooled our Christmas money together. It was about $200 to buy just the keyboard with the circuits inside of it. And then we had to go to a used clothing store and buy a black and white television. And these broke down about every 2 weeks, so we'd have to go get a new TV all the time. And you plugged your computer into the TV and programmed in black and white. You turned your Commodore 64 on, and it was a BASIC interpreter. So you couldn't really do anything other than start typing BASIC commands, or you could plug in a cartridge and play a game, which is kind of what my brothers did while I was reading the schematics and the reference guides for the platform, and taking programs out of Byte magazine and stuff and putting them into the keyboard. And we had a tape deck for it, so you could store your work and listen to your audio version of your program, which was horrible.
All right. So, third question. Where do you work now? What are you doing?
I work for a company called Sitecore, which is a ASP.NET web content management software vendor, and my title is Chief Technology Officer, which is a little bit different than the role that I actually fill in the company, which is more of Chief Developer Advocate. So in college, one of my professors had a degree in programmer productivity, and this has kind of shaped my perspective of the industry. So instead of seeing it as people that are walled off and told what to do and kind of throw requirements over a wall, I see programming as a much more collaborative effort where I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. These guys that came before me wrote all sorts of stuff, developed the hardware, all of the underlying layers, and I'm just sitting at the top using 5% of what's there and at a very high abstraction level. And so for me to have benefited from all of the work that was done by those people, I don't think I can have the same influence, but I can at least help people get more productivity out of software in less time with less frustration if I share the information that's in my head. And that information's really not worth much unless I share it. It's whatever program I can write, that's not very useful. But if I can share that with thousands of developers that can then write programs, that information has a lot more value. And so my goal is really just to share information and to encourage developers to share information so that we don't end up in our kind of walled in solitude of programming that we sometimes get into.
That's a very noble goal.
All right, so fourth question. What is it that keeps you interested in programming?
So for me, what keeps me interested in computer programming and the industry in general is the pace of change. So I'm always reading and always trying to learn something new, even if I can never apply it. I study tons of fields that I will never even have a conversation with somebody about, let alone actually use as a career. So in our field, we always get to deal with change. It actually increases every year. It gets faster and faster. So I'm looking for paradigm shifts. Some of the early paradigm shifts were things like the move from machine language to interpreted languages or compiled languages. And then there were advancements like SQL. If you're not from those days, you don't realize how groundbreaking this technology was and how the computer could suddenly do things that it could never do before, or at least at any scale. And the next major thing for me was probably the protocols like HTTP and FTP and how that opened up computers to a whole new range of possibilities. And so for me, the next two exciting things after that were kind of XML, which is not that exciting because there are other standards, other ways to exchange data that are actually more efficient, like JSON or and after that it was really .NET. And .NET I would say was the last one that really got me as boy, this is so exciting. And that was a long time ago, but I immediately said, this is the programming language that I want to work with. I'd worked with tons of programming languages, and I'd spent a lot of time researching Java. I did some Java in production, but I never really liked Java. I never really felt comfortable with it. And for me, C# and .NET addressed all of the problems that I had with Java really well. Clean class libraries, really clean syntax, flexible project structure. I don't even remember what the big deals were that I didn't like about no class path. Oh, that was thank you for taking away class path.
I do love digging through environment variables, yeah.
Every once in a while.
All right, so fifth point is not a question. This is your opportunity to give your exception message.
So I don't necessarily have an exception message, but I'll throw an exception, and the exception that I'll throw is a missing reference exception because I feel like I drop missing references all the time. I try to tell a lot of jokes, try and keep things light, and I'd say about 60% of the time people don't get the jokes, and that's kind of where I aim for about 40% not drop on the floor jokes. And so a lot of the reasons, or the main reason why jokes fail is because the audience doesn't get the reference that you're making. That's why I'm throwing a missing reference exception. It's kind of a joke.
I get it.
Okay, thank you. So that was Catching Exceptions, and you just met John West, Chief Developer Advocate at Sitecore. Next time you see me, we're going to be getting to know somebody else. Till then, hang loose.